8 faces, one legendary film. 66 years later, who is still alive. When The Magnificent Seven rode into theaters in 1960, it gave us more than a Western. For those of us who grew up watching it on Saturday afternoons with our fathers, with popcorn and a black and white TV glowing in the living room. These weren't just actors. They were the men who made us believe the world was still full of courage and possibility. Today, we're going back to remember who they were, what happened to them, and why this cast and this film never left us. There was a moment in 1960 when Brynner walked onto the screen in black, settled into his saddle, and made every other man in the frame feel slightly smaller. That was Chris Adams. And if you saw it, you never forgot it. Born in Vladivostok, Russia in 1920, Brynner's early life was already more dramatic than any screenplay. His family fled the Red Army. He grew up across Russia, China, and France, working as a trapeze acrobat in Paris, playing guitar with Romani musicians, speaking multiple languages before Hollywood ever found him. By 1956, he was one of the biggest stars in the world. The King and I made him an icon and won him an Oscar. But The Magnificent Seven gave him the image that would follow him forever. The shaved head, the black clothes, the stillness that said more than words ever could. In 1983, doctors told him he had inoperable lung cancer. He kept performing. His final appearance as the King of Siam came in June 1985, his 4,633rd time in that role across 34 years. He died 4 months later, October 10th, 1985, at 65. But before he went, he recorded a message for the world to see only after his death. Days after he died, the American Cancer Society broadcasted. He looked into the camera and said, "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke." Chris Adams rode into the village with perfect calm. Brynner turned his own death into a warning for the living. If Brynner owned the screen, Steve McQueen stole it. He had only 7 lines in the original script, so he twirled shotgun shells during Brynner's speeches. He adjusted his hat. He found wordless ways to pull the camera toward himself, until Brynner hired someone to count how many times McQueen touched his hat in a single take. That restless energy made Vin Tanner impossible to look away from. Born in Indiana in 1930, McQueen's childhood left scars that never healed. His father left before he was born. His mother couldn't raise him. By 14, he was in reform school. By 17, in the Marines. It was in the Marines, removing asbestos from pipes aboard a ship, that the seeds of his death were quietly planted. Nobody told him what asbestos was. The Magnificent Seven launched him toward a career that made him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood. Bullet, The Great Escape. The car chased through San Francisco nobody who saw it ever forgot. But by 1978, he had a cough that wouldn't go away. In 1979, doctors diagnosed pleural mesothelioma and said nothing more could be done. He refused to accept it. He flew to Mexico under a false name, seeking experimental treatments. On November 7th, 1980, 12 hours after surgery, Steve McQueen's heart stopped. He was 50 years old. Vin Tanner walked into that village as the coolest man alive. Steve McQueen walked into a Mexican clinic under a false name and never walked back out. Some faces carry a whole life before a single word is spoken. Charles Bronson had that kind of face. Born Charles Bukinski in 1921, the 11th of 15 children of Lithuanian coal miners in Pennsylvania. Bronson grew up in crushing poverty. His father died when he was 10, By 16, he was working in the mines, earning $1 per ton of coal. He once wore his sister's dress to school because he had no clothes of his own. World War II pulled him out. He served as a tail gunner on B-29 bombers and came home with a Purple Heart. He used the GI Bill to study art, then acting, and changed his Russian name to avoid the McCarthy blacklists. In The Magnificent Seven, the scene audiences remember isn't a gunfight. It's when Bernardo tells the village boys their fathers carry heavier courage than any gunfighter because they carry it every day for nothing but love. Bronson played that moment with a gentleness that came from somewhere very real. His greatest love was British actress Jill Ireland. He married her in 1968 and insisted she be cast in 15 films alongside him so they'd never be apart. When Jill died of breast cancer in 1990, something in Bronson quietly broke. He had her cremated and placed her ashes inside a hollow walking cane. That cane went everywhere with him. Charles Bronson died August 30th, 2003, at 81. His family buried him on a Vermont hilltop and placed the cane with Jill's ashes in the grave beside him. The man on screen said farmers carry the heaviest load. The man in real life carried his greatest love in a walking cane until the day he died. Before we continue, which of these men do you remember most? Was it Brynner's stillness, McQueen's cool, or Bronson's quiet strength? Drop your answer in the comments. We love hearing your memories. If Bronson gave the film its heart, James Coburn gave it its swagger. Britt had only 11 lines in the entire film. Coburn needed even fewer. He communicated through a slow grin, a knife that appeared from nowhere, and a physical ease that made everyone else look like they were working too hard. Born in Nebraska in 1928, Coburn spent decades playing cool, dangerous men who never raised their voices. But by the 1980s, crippling rheumatoid arthritis turned his hands into claws. He could barely hold a coffee cup. He tried every treatment medicine offered. And when medicine failed, he turned to alternative therapies. Sulfur pills saved his life. By the late 1990s, his hands worked again. In 1998, at 70 years old, James Coburn won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in Affliction. When he held that Oscar, his hands that once couldn't close, were steady. He died November 18, 2002, at 74. Britt was the knife fighter who never missed. James Coburn was the man who rebuilt his hands and won an Oscar at 70. Robert Vaughn played Lee, the haunted gunfighter running from ghosts he couldn't shake. Born in New York in 1932, Vaughn was different from the others. He held a PhD in communications from USC. He testified against the Vietnam War before Congress. He read constantly, thought deeply, and refused to play the Hollywood game. The Magnificent Seven made him famous, but the man from UNCLE made him a television icon. He worked steadily for 6 decades, but he also built something quieter and more lasting. A 42-year marriage to Linda Staub, raised 2 children, and lived a grounded life far from the spotlight. He died November 11th, 2016, at 83, from complications of leukemia. Lee was running from his past. Robert Vaughn built a future that outlasted Hollywood fame. No conversation about the Magnificent Seven is complete without the man who made the seven necessary. Eli Wallach played Calvera, the bandit with gold teeth and a grin that suggested he found the whole situation amusing. Born in Brooklyn in 1915 to Polish Jewish immigrants, Wallach brought theatrical menace and dark humor that made Calvera one of the most entertaining villains in Western film history. He was already a Broadway star and actor studio founder when he arrived on set at 44. He went on to work for 7 more decades, acting well into his 90s, collecting a Tony, an Emmy, a BAFTA, and finally an honorary Oscar in 2010 at 94. He died peacefully in Manhattan on June 24, 2014, at 98. His wife of 66 years, actress Ann Jackson, passed away 2 years later. Calvera couldn't understand why men would ride into danger for $20. Eli Wallach proved exactly why by working with joy and dedication for 70 years. Every great ensemble has someone holding it together from the edges, and almost nobody remembers them for it. Brad Dexter lived that reality both on screen and off. Born Boris Soso in 1917 in Nevada, Dexter spent his career playing tough guys who made other stars look better. Harry Luck joins the 7 convinced Chris is hiding treasure in those Mexican hills. When Harry is fatally shot, he asks with his last breath if there was really gold. Chris lies. Harry smiles, says, "That would have been swell," and dies happy. But the story that defined Dexter happened in 1964. Frank Sinatra and a woman were swept out to sea by a riptide in Hawaii. Dexter plunged in and stayed in the water 45 minutes, pulling them to shore. At one point, Sinatra drifted away and said quietly, "It's all over. I'm going to die." Surfers helped Dexter drag both back to the beach. The Red Cross gave him a medal. Sinatra made him vice president of Sinatra Enterprises. Then, Dexter told Sinatra not to marry 20-year-old Mia Farrow, and Sinatra cut him off completely. He never publicly thanked Dexter for saving his life. Brad Dexter died December 2002 at 85. He's buried at Desert Memorial Park in California. Frank Sinatra is buried in the same cemetery, 100 yards away. Harry Luck died chasing gold that was never there. Brad Dexter saved Frank Sinatra's life, was never thanked, and now rests 100 yards from the man he pulled from the ocean. And then there was the youngest one. Horst Buchholz was 26 when he played Chico, the hot-blooded kid who follows the 7, earns his place, and at the end makes the choice that surprises everyone. He puts down his gun. He stays in the village because the girl he loves is there, because belonging somewhere is its own kind of courage. Born in Berlin in 1933, Buchholz grew up during World War II. Evacuated as a child, placed in foster care in Czechoslovakia, then walking himself back to the ruins of Berlin, alone as a teenager. He became Germany's biggest young star, their James Dean, and crossed to Hollywood at the perfect moment. Then he turned down the roles that would have made him a legend: Tony in West Side Story, Sheriff Ali in Lawrence of Arabia, and the man with no name in A Fistful of Dollars. That last one went to Clint Eastwood. He never reached the Hollywood heights that seemed destined, but he found other things: a marriage that lasted 45 years, 2 children who loved him, and a late triumph in Life is Beautiful that reminded the world what he'd always been capable of. He died in Berlin, March 3rd, 2003, at 69, in the same city he'd walked back to as a child. His gravestone reads, "Love the world, and the world will love you." Giro Chico was the youngest gunfighter, and the only one brave enough to put down his weapon and choose a life. 8 men rode into a village in 1960 and changed the way a generation watched movies. Looking back at them now, 66 years later, what stays with you isn't the gunfights or the famous faces or even Elmer Bernstein's legendary score. It's how fully and how humanly each of them lived. Brynner, who turned his own death into a message for the living. McQueen, who fought until the very last hour under a false name in a foreign country. Bronson, who carried his wife in a walking cane for 13 years. Coburn, who held his Oscar with hands that could barely close. Vaughn, who built 42 quiet years of real life far from Hollywood. Wallach, who worked with joy until he was 98. Dexter, who saved a man who never said thank you. Buchholz, who walked home through the ruins and never stopped looking for where he belonged. These were not perfect men, but they were real ones. Time takes everything eventually, but some things only make it deeper. The courage Brynner showed wasn't in playing a gunfighter. It was in facing his own death with enough strength to warn others. The cool Steve McQueen gave us on screen wasn't half as brave as the fight he fought when the cameras stopped rolling. Charles Bronson didn't become a legend because he was tough. He became one because beneath that stoned face lived a man who understood what it meant to carry love, even after death. And the youngest gunfighter, Chico, taught us the bravest thing of all, knowing when to put the gun down and choose the life you actually want to live. These men gave us heroes on screen, but the real heroism was in how they lived when the movie ended. They lost fortunes, survived wars, buried the people they loved, fought diseases, and kept working. Not because they had to, but because they understood something we sometimes forget. That's showing up, even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching, even when your hands don't work anymore. That's the kind of courage that outlasts any role. If you watch this film with your father on a Saturday afternoon, if you remember the way the music swelled when the Seven first rode in, if you ever sat in a dark theater and believed for 2 hours that the world still had room for men like this, then you already know what made The Magnificent Seven more than just a movie. It was a feeling, a moment, a world we got to visit for a little while. And 66 years later, even though every one of them is gone, that feeling is still here. Because they left it behind for us, and we get to carry it forward. Which of these 8 men do you remember most from watching this film? And is there a scene, a line, or a single moment from The Magnificent Seven that has stayed with you all these years? Share your memories in the comments below. Every one of them is worth reading. Some of the most beautiful stories we've ever heard come from people just like you, remembering the films that shaped them. And if classic Hollywood, old westerns, and the true stories behind the actors who made a generation believe in heroes still mean something to you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join us next time for another journey back through the films and the faces a whole era never forgot. Because some things don't fade, they just settle deeper into who we are.